Welcome to this 365 Freedom Strategy session. Today we're breaking down the worthiness of ease and why your obsession with complexity is actively killing your consistency.
Right. It's a huge issue.
It really is. I want you, the listener, to just think about a time when you completely overhauled some process in your business.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Maybe it was client onboarding, or maybe inventory management, or even just your weekly content production. You map it all out. You bring in like 5 different software tools.
Always the 5 tools.
Always. You create this intricate web of checks and balances, and then you launch it. And, for the first week, it actually feels incredible.
Yeah, you feel like a real operator.
Exactly. But then you fast forward, say, 3 months, and that exact same system is just this massive weight around your neck. You absolutely dread interacting with it.
And your team is probably secretly finding workarounds just to avoid it.
Totally. You built a machine, but now, well, you're the one powering it. So today we're exploring a stack of operational memos and internal case files, and our mission here is to completely dismantle this assumption that business value has to be tied to hardship.
Which is such a pervasive myth.
It is. We're going to look at why founders instinctively build these traps for themselves and, more importantly, the specific operational mechanics you need to strip out the friction and actually scale.
Yeah, because that scenario you just described, the founder who is trapped by their own creation, that is basically the defining operational bottleneck of our time.
Mm-hmm.
We analyze these patterns constantly, and the ceiling most operators hit, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with market conditions.
Right. Or team capability. Right.
Exactly. They hit a ceiling because they're operating under this deeply embedded, almost subconscious belief that if a system doesn't punish them, well, it isn't producing real value. The source material we're looking at today captures this dynamic brilliantly with just one stark observation. It says, many systems stay complicated for one simple reason. People do not believe ease is allowed.
That's heavy.
Right, and that is not a software problem. That is entirely a psychological barrier.
Yeah, the idea that ease feels dangerous it's just such a counterintuitive concept.
It really is.
Because if you go and ask literally any entrepreneur what they want, they will immediately say, I want freedom, I want automation, I want a smooth running machine.
Of course. That's the dream.
But then you look at their daily actions and they tell a completely different story. Like, our sources point out that when a process actually feels simple, this profound paranoia sets in.
Oh, yeah. The panic.
Yeah. The operator just assumes, uh-oh, I must be missing a critical variable. Like, they assume they're being careless.
Right. Like, if this is easy, I'm doing something right.
Exactly. So to soothe that anxiety, they just inject complexity. It's like complexity becomes their security blanket.
It functions entirely as a defense mechanism against imposter syndrome. I mean, think about the earliest stages of building any enterprise, right?
Right, the very beginning.
The founder's primary currency is just sheer brute force effort. They don't have refined systems, they usually lack capital, so they just throw their personal energy at literally every problem.
And the crazy part is it works.
It does. That massive application of friction and energy, it yields an early result. But the danger is that the brain connects those 2 data points. It turns a simple correlation into a rigid causation.
Oh, I see. So the founder learns that suffering equals revenue.
Exactly. They internalize this idea that the sheer exhaustion they feel at the end of the day is the actual metric of their success. So if they aren't exhausted, they honestly feel like they're cheating.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the feeling of working hard can be incredibly deceptive. I want to use an analogy here.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you're behind the wheel of this massive, heavy-duty commercial truck, right? But the power steering column is completely shattered.
Oh, sounds awful.
Right, so to make even the slightest lane change, you are just white-knuckling the steering wheel. Your shoulders are burning, your back is tense, you're literally sweating through your shirt just to keep this thing on the road.
Yeah, a massive physical toll.
Exactly. And from inside the cab, you feel like you are doing an astonishing amount of quote-unquote driving.
Right, the feedback loop to your brain is screaming that you're engaged in this highly productive, incredibly demanding work.
Yes. But then look at it from the outside. You are traveling down the exact same stretch of highway at the exact same speed as the driver next to you who actually has fully functioning power steering.
And they're just guiding the truck with, like, one hand resting on the wheel.
Exactly. You are not arriving at your destination one single minute faster than they are. You're just confusing the difficulty of the operation with the velocity of the journey.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, like the burning in your arms. It isn't creating forward momentum. It's literally just a symptom of a broken system. Yet because of that burn, you convince yourself that your journey is somehow more legitimate.
Right. Or more valuable. And applying that directly to business systems, that shattered power steering, is the unnecessary complexity you force into your daily operations. It's when you hold on to manual data entry, or you insist on being the final bottleneck for every minor decision.
Oh, the 3 redundant meetings to confirm something that could have been an automated Slack ping.
Yes, exactly. And when you carry that moralization of difficulty into your system design, you utterly destroy your capacity for what we call the minimum viable output, or the MVO.
Oh, the MVO. We really need to spend some serious time on this concept because founders completely misunderstand it.
They get it backwards.
Totally. The minimum viable output is supposed to be the absolute baseline delivery required to keep the business solvent and moving forward, right? It's that core set of actions that actually generate revenue or serve the client or just maintain operational stability. And it should be as light as air.
But instead, founders artificially inflate their MVO until it becomes this massive, crushing burden.
Yeah.
If you operate under this subconscious rule that your MVO is not allowed to be simple, you're going to look at a straightforward task, let's say, generating a weekly client report, and your anxiety is just going to take over.
Oh, I've seen this play out so many times.
Right. Because a lightweight MVO might dictate just pulling 3 key metrics into a template and hitting send. 10 minutes of focused effort.
Boom. Done.
Done. But the complexity-obsessed founder looks at that 10-minute task and feels guilt.
I can't just send a template. They're paying us thousands of dollars.
Exactly. They think this is too easy. So they add a custom cross-referencing spreadsheet. Then they mandate this narrative summary that requires a manager's review.
Oh, and they build a custom dashboard that breaks constantly.
Always. They turn a 10-minute baseline requirement into a multi-day ordeal that drains 3 different team members.
So they basically dismantle their own power steering on purpose just so they can feel the burn of delivering the work.
Precisely.
And the irony here, the real tragic irony, is that the client usually doesn't even care about the dashboard or the narrative summary.
Not at all.
The client just wants those 3 key metrics so they can make their own decisions.
Right. The founder isn't actually adding value for the client. They're just adding friction for themselves to justify their own existence in the process.
Which creates a massive operational drag across the whole company.
A huge drag. Because if every baseline task in your company is inflated with this performative difficulty, you end up with 0 surge capacity.
0.
The moment you face a real crisis, or even a good thing, like the moment you land a massive new account,
The whole thing breaks.
the entire infrastructure craps. Because your team is already operating at 100% capacity just to maintain the unnecessarily complex baseline. You've essentially bottlenecked your own growth by refusing to accept that a simple, lightweight system is valid.
Man, that transitions us perfectly into the timeline of this problem. Because founders know they're exhausted.
Right.
They feel it. But they use a very specific narrative to delay actually fixing the issue.
They really do.
Our source material shares this devastating little micro story. Let me read it. It says, "Someone once told me they would simplify once they earned it. Once things slowed down, that moment never came."
Wow. Yeah. This raises an important question, though.
Which is,
Why does that horizon of ease constantly recede? Why does the quote-unquote someday moment of simplification literally never arrive?
right, it's always someday.
It's the trap of treating ease as a future reward rather than a present-day design requirement. Founders tell themselves they have to build this fortress of stability first, and then, only once they are safe inside, will they lower the drawbridge and relax.
Yeah, they wait for their environment to be perfectly proven and totally stable before they give themselves permission to implement simple systems.
Exactly.
They treat ease like a retirement plan. Like you put in 40 years of grueling, bone-crushing labor, and then eventually you get the gold watch and the smooth-running business.
But the fundamental flaw in that logic is the assumption that waiting for things to slow down is a passive event.
What do you mean?
The complexity you are maintaining today is the exact engine generating the chaos you are waiting to subside.
Oh, well.
You cannot wait for the environment to calm down. before you implement simple systems because your heavy, convoluted workflows are actively creating all the noise. You're basically waiting for the fire to put itself out while you continuously pour gasoline on it.
Okay, hear the theory there, but I got to play devil's advocate for a second. Let's pressure test this against reality.
Sure, go for it.
Because if you look at the trajectory of almost any highly successful enterprise, the early days are defined by absolute hustle.
Right.
Undeniably. It's late nights, it's shipping broken products and fixing them live. It's doing things that literally don't scale. So, but don't founders inherently need to suffer through that phase? Doesn't that period of intense, messy hustle actually validate the business model and, quote-unquote, earn the right to a streamlined operation later?
That's a great question.
Because you can't just start on day one with an effortless, frictionless machine.
No, you can't, and that is exactly the most common defense of complexity. But it fundamentally conflates two very different types of effort.
Yeah, break that down for me.
Yes, launching an enterprise requires an immense, highly concentrated application of focus and energy. You're solving novel problems, finding product market fit, learning what your customer actually needs.
Yeah, you're in the trenches.
That requires intensity. But, and this is crucial, there is a massive distinction between applying intense focus to solve a novel problem and deliberately institutionalizing a convoluted workflow just because you think suffering is a moral prerequisite for success.
Ah, okay. So it's the difference between the effort of discovery and the effort of maintenance.
Precisely the distinction. The hustle phase is about discovery. But once you discover the solution, the transition to maintenance should be immediate, and it should be focused on ease.
Right.
As our source material emphatically states, ease is a design choice, not a reward. It's a structural decision that makes the survival of the business possible today.
Yeah, not 5 years from now.
Exactly. If you build an operational system during your hustle phase that relies entirely on your personal, heroic effort to function on a daily basis, you have not built a business. You've built a cage.
You've just created a very stressful job for yourself where you are essentially the worst boss you've ever had.
Absolutely. And you haven't earned anything for the future. By institutionalizing heroics, you have guaranteed that your business will hit a brick wall the very moment your personal energy reserves are depleted.
Because you're the single point of failure.
Right. If your onboarding process requires you to be awake at midnight, manually transferring data between software platforms because you haven't earned the right to buy a $50 integration tool, you are jeopardizing the entire company.
Yeah, that's just reckless.
You choose ease while you are building so that you actually have the endurance to finish the building process.
I love that. Let's bring this down to the ground level, though, because the source material actually gives us a very clear diagnostic tool for spotting this in the wild.
It does, the manual maintenance trap.
Yes, the manual maintenance trap. This is exactly where the philosophy of worthiness collides with daily operations. The text notes that this trap manifests as workflows relying on manual effort way past the point of necessity. It shows up as, like, extra steps, redundant checks, and systems that technically function, but only if they have constant human attention.
The text provides a very telling example of this. There was a founder who absolutely refused to simplify a core operational process. They were terrified that removing steps would reduce the quality of the output or cause them to lose control over the outcome entirely.
Right, that illusion of control.
Exactly. So they kept the bloated system in place. And it worked, technically speaking, but it required daily manual maintenance and, more importantly, constant mental tracking.
Oh, man. Mental tracking.
That phrase, mental tracking, is the silent killer of organizational growth.
It's the hidden tax on your executive function. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the underlying mechanics here, because I think people drastically underestimate the cost of an open loop in their brain.
They absolutely do. We usually audit the cost of a workflow in terms of payroll hours or software subscriptions. Right?
Yeah, like, oh, it takes 20 minutes.
Right. We calculate that a manual data entry task takes 20 minutes a day, so we assume the cost is just 20 minutes of a coordinator's time. But the heaviest cost is the cognitive load required to manage that manual touch point.
Explain that a bit more.
When a system requires manual maintenance, it means the system does not exist independently of the human operator. The human is the infrastructure.
And the human brain is not designed to be infrastructure.
Not at all.
If you are the person responsible for, say, Moving a piece of data from a CRM to an invoicing software every Tuesday at 3 p.m., the cost isn't just the 5 minutes it takes to copy and paste.
Exactly.
The true cost is the background processing running in your brain all day Monday and all morning Tuesday. Like, did I remember to do that last week? Will I have time to do it before my 3.30 meeting? What if the client updates their address before I make the transfer?
That mental tracking bleeds your executive function dry,
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
and it induces a state of chronic operational anxiety. Even the smallest manual tasks, when you string them together across an entire business model, they create this cognitive burden that degrades the quality of every other decision you make. You end up with less patience for your team, less creativity for strategic planning, and way less resilience when real problems arise, all because your brain is subconsciously managing a checklist of fragile manual interventions.
And the irony is that founders fiercely defend these manual traps because they honestly believe it gives them control.
Right, they think it's safety.
They operate under this delusion that if their eyes are on every single step of the process, they can guarantee a flawless outcome. But holding on to that type of hyper-vigilant oversight actually creates the most fragile environment possible.
Because it introduces the single highest variable of risk into the equation: human fallibility.
Yes. Think about the reality of human performance. We get bad sleep. We get into an argument with our spouse before work.
We get distracted by a sudden influx of urgent emails. We get the flu.
Right. So if your entire quality control mechanism is based on the premise that I, the founder, will personally review this document, cross-reference these 5 variables from memory, and ensure everything is perfect, your system is incredibly brittle.
It's terrifyingly brittle.
You are taking the stability of your business and resting it entirely on the fluctuating daily chemistry of your own brain.
Which is just an irresponsible way to manage risk. You believe you are protecting the standard of work, but you're actually guaranteeing that the standard of work will collapse the moment you get sick or overwhelmed.
And if we project this vulnerability forward into a growth scenario, the danger compounds exponentially, right? Imagine a company trying to scale revenue while keeping these manual traps intact.
It's a recipe for spontaneous combustion.
Truly. If you double your client roster, but your onboarding still requires your personal manual review of every single contract, your cognitive load doesn't just double. The complexity multiplies. The friction increases exponentially.
Exactly. Scaling a business that is built on manual traps is not just physically exhausting for the team. It is operationally reckless. The infrastructure will inevitably fracture, and here's the worst part. The clients will be the ones who suffer the consequences of your need for control.
Which is exactly what you were trying to prevent in the first place.
Exactly. And this is where the source material provides the blueprint for the pivot.
Oh, yes.
The text details what happens when a founder finally confronts this fragility. The micro story explains that eventually they ran an experiment. They tested a lighter version of the process.
What did that look like?
They instituted specific operational changes, fewer steps, clear responsibility, and significantly less manual involvement.
So they took the leap of faith. They stopped playing the role of human infrastructure.
They did. And the result of that experiment is the absolute crux of this entire analysis. The text states, nothing broke. Quality stayed consistent.
Nothing broke.
The technical output of the system did not degrade at all.
So what does this all mean? Because I think this often shocks founders when they first experience it.
Oh, it terrifies them first, and then it shocks them. They anticipate a catastrophe. They assume that if they aren't suffering over the details will inherently be wrong. So we really must break down the operational mechanics of how a system can lose steps, require drastically less human intervention, and yet maintain the exact same standard of quality.
Okay, let's dissect the difference between redundant checks and clear responsibility, because I feel like that is where the magic trick happens.
It is.
In a complex, fear-driven system, you see redundancy everywhere. Let's say you have a copywriter draft an email, right? Then a manager reviews it, then the legal team signs off on it. And finally, the founder does a final read-through before hitting send. Everyone feels very safe because there are 4 layers of protection.
But those redundant checks are a total illusion of safety. In reality, they completely diffuse responsibility. This is the operational equivalent of the bystander effect.
The bystander effect, yes.
Yeah. If 4 people are assigned to review a piece of communication, nobody truly owns the outcome. The manager skims it because they assume legal will catch the technical errors. Legal skims it because they assume the founder will catch the tone issues.
And the founder skims it because they assume the first 3 people already vetted it thoroughly.
Exactly. You have massive friction, massive delays, and yet a incredibly high probability of errors slipping through because ownership is scattered.
It's a high-effort, low-accountability environment.
Precisely. But the lighter version of the system flips that dynamic entirely.
Right. By stripping away the bloated approval matrix and assigning clear, singular responsibility, you change the psychology of the work.
You do.
You say, Person A, you own the outcome of this email. Use this one streamlined tool to send it. Nobody else is checking it. You are not lowering your standard of quality. You are elevating the level of accountability.
You optimize the delivery by removing the ambiguity. When one person knows they are solely responsible for the final output, their focus sharpens.
Makes sense.
The quality remains consistent. Or, honestly, it often improves, because the psychological safety net of redundant checks has been removed. What shifted in the source's example wasn't the caliber of the final product, it was the subjective experience of producing that product.
Yeah, as the text observes, it stopped feeling heavy.
Exactly. The workflow began to run autonomously without requiring constant oversight from leadership.
Which introduces a massive identity crisis for the founder, doesn't it?
Oh, huge.
Because when the system suddenly runs smoothly, when the chaos stops, the founder gets like 10 hours of their week back. And because their identity was so tied up in being the heroic firefighter,
They suddenly feel useless.
yes, they have to confront the fact that the business doesn't need their suffering to survive.
But if they can navigate that discomfort, they arrive at the most profound realization in the text regarding growth. The source states, ease does not reduce output, it stabilized it. And furthermore, ease did not reduce commitment, it reduced resistance.
Wow. Ease did not reduce commitment, it reduced resistance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those two sentences represent a fundamental shift in the physics of business systems. We need to clearly separate the concept of commitment from the concept of resistance, because conflating the two is what keeps founders trapped.
A lot of operators assume that if they aren't feeling immense resistance, they aren't truly committed to the objective.
They view friction as evidence of their dedication. But think of a high-performance engine. If an engine is filled with gritty, degraded oil, the pistons are going to scrape, the engine block will overheat, and it'll take a massive amount of fuel just to tune the crankshaft.
Right, it's struggling.
That is resistance.
Yeah.
Now, if you flush that engine and replace it with clean, synthetic oil, the parts glide smoothly. The engine runs quietly and efficiently. You haven't reduced the engine's capacity or its commitment to powering the vehicle.
You've simply eliminated the internal friction that was threatening to tear the machine apart from the inside.
Exactly. Resistance is not the work. Resistance is the inefficiency that prevents you from doing the actual work.
So, like, if you have to fight with your CRM for 20 minutes just to log a sales call, that 20 minutes of frustration doesn't prove how dedicated you are to sales.
Not at all.
It just proves your CRM is a massive roadblock. If you streamline the software so the call logs with one click, your commitment to the sales goal hasn't dropped. You've just conserved your energy for the actual conversation with the client.
And this conservation of energy is the only mechanism that makes true scalability possible. You cannot scale an operation if your systems demand maximal red line effort just to maintain the current baseline.
Right. A founder only has a finite number of cognitive hours and physical energy reserves in a given day.
Light, frictionless workflows are the only infrastructures capable of holding heavier volume. If you intend to run a massive amount of freight over a bridge, the bridge itself needs to be structurally sound and stable.
It cannot be shaking violently, requiring a crew of engineers to hold the bolts together while the trucks drive over it.
Exactly. Simple systems stabilize the output because they remove the friction that causes human burnout. And when output becomes stable, it becomes predictable.
And predictability is the absolute prerequisite for scaling.
You cannot project growth, you cannot confidently hire, and you cannot secure investment if your core delivery process fluctuates wildly based on whether the founder had a good night's sleep.
Yeah, nobody's investing in that.
You can only scale a stabilized, easily managed workflow. This is exactly why the obsession with complexity actively kills consistency. Consistency requires repetition over long time horizons. Human beings cannot infinitely repeat a process that feels like a punishment. They will eventually cut corners, burn out, or quit.
Ease is what allows for sustainable repetition.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the immediate practical application for everyone listening today, the concept of actionable worthiness.
Yes, let's talk about implementation.
Because the source material doesn't just leave us with theory, it gives us a direct mandate. It says, You are allowed to simplify. Ease belongs in your systems now. And the core call to action is remarkably simple. Let one system be easier today without justification.
Implementing the worthiness of ease is an active daily discipline. It is not a mindset shift that just happens overnight. It is a series of small, deliberate operational audits.
Right.
It requires you to look at your current business environment and aggressively hunt for unnecessary friction. We have to define what it means to allow a system to feel supportive rather than punishing.
Well, a punishing system is incredibly easy to identify, isn't it?
Oh yeah, you feel in your gut.
Exactly. It's the workflow that makes your stomach drop when you remember you have to do it. It's the software interface that is so clunky you literally find yourself apologizing to your new hires during onboarding.
Sorry about this tool, just bear with it.
Yes. Or it's the approval process that takes 2 weeks for a decision that should literally take 2 minutes.
And a supportive system, on the other hand, is practically invisible.
Invisible. I like that.
It guides the user quietly from the starting point to the final deliverable. It absorbs the heavy lifting so the human can focus on high-level decision-making. To transition from punishing to supportive, you have to practice making changes without demanding a moral justification.
You don't need to earn it.
You do not need to wait until the end of a profitable quarter to earn the right to upgrade your clunky software. The removal of friction is its own complete business case.
Yeah.
If a change saves executive function, it is justified immediately.
So if you are listening to this right now, we are issuing a direct challenge. Look at your daily operations today. Find the single process, the one specific workflow, or maybe the one recurring meeting that feels like an absolute punishment.
Just one.
Just one. You do not need to pause your entire company and run a 6-month operational overhaul, but you must actively choose to redesign that one specific process for ease today.
Remove one redundant approval step.
Automate one manual transfer of client data.
Clarify one ambiguous piece of responsibility so that a team member can execute without asking for your permission.
And critically, make that change without telling yourself you have to suffer somewhere else to make up for the newly found ease. Let the system be light.
Just let it be easy.
I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on as you audit your workflows this week. What if you entirely divorced the concept of hard work from the concept of impact?
That's a huge paradigm shift.
It is. If you completely separated those two ideas in your mind, how much of your current daily schedule would you suddenly realize is just performative suffering? What would happen if, starting tomorrow, you judged your success as a leader purely by the effortless quality of your results, rather than the sheer exhaustion of your efforts?
It changes everything.
It really does. If you're ready to design your business for ease, visit 365 Freedom online to join the community. This has been a 365 Freedom Strategy session.